From the gridiron to the hardwood, James Mesh breaks it all down. It's time for another episode of Cleats and Sneaks.
We're making further developments into the NBA playoffs, and now we have one team that's already slated into their conference finals. Welcome into yet another edition of Cleats and Sneaks. I'm your host, James Mesh, the podcast where we talk about everything in the NFL and the NBA, and what a better time to be talking about the NBA right now as we're getting down to that final stretch. We now know that the Boston Celtics, after winning their series against the Cleveland Cavaliers in 5 games, a gentleman's sweep, they are slated in to the Eastern Conference Finals. But we do have 3 other series to look at as we are getting down that stretch, as we now have 3 teams at this point that are ahead 3-2 in their series. Of course, that means the New York Knicks ahead of the Indiana Pacers. You look at the Denver Nuggets ahead of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And then, of course, now the Dallas Mavericks are ahead of the number 1 seeded Oklahoma City Thunder in the Western Conference, up 3-2. Quite a bit of development as we've gotten into it. And before we get into the series that are about to happen, as we've got a game going on in the next 3 nights, let's look at what happened in this last series between the Boston Celtics and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, of course, early on, you look at game 1, and it was an expected dominant win by the Celtics. They end up taking down the Cavaliers by 25 on their home floor. But then you look at game 2, and it was kind of a shocker, as you see, well, I guess you could say it was almost not as much of a shocker, because this has been a development that has happened over the last couple of years for the Celtics. They don't seem to do as well at home in the playoffs as you would expect. They've had a much worse record at home than they've had on the road. And for some reason, they're really good on the road. It's a good test and a good sign of a really good basketball team and just a good sports team in general. But you would be shocked as to see the numbers compared to their home record versus their on the road record. And it's not only this year, but it's also last year and a little bit of the previous year when it came to the postseason. They actually ended up losing to the Cavs in game 2, 118-94, a really poor performance offensively by the Celtics. And you could just tell Cleveland just refused to miss shots. And over the series, the first 3 games, Donovan Mitchell was absolutely dominant, and he was going to be the main piece as to why the Cleveland Cavaliers would extend the series farther than maybe a lot of people anticipated, or could potentially have the upset against the Celtics, even though that wasn't very likely. Well, he was able to do really well in the first 3 games against Boston, whether it was on their home floor in Cleveland or against the Celtics in the TD Garden. But he missed game 4 and missed game 5, and that left prime opportunities for the Celtics to take over and get this series in 5 games. Now, it was not without a concerted effort by guys on Cleveland's team like Darius Garland, Max Strus, Evan Mobley, and others. They didn't really step up in those first couple of games, but once you saw that you were going to be without Jared Allen, you were going to be without Karis LeVert, especially in game 5 as he had missed last night's matchup. But then Donovan Mitchell, he was out for games 4 and 5. Who was going to step up and not let this be a 20 or 30 plus point blowout like you had seen in the Heat series in the opening round of the playoffs? Well, Darius Garland, even though he was really slow to start the series and even start the playoffs in the first round against the Magic, he was a little disappointing, but you could tell he started to get into his groove and he was able to knock down some shots and get back into how he was before, because he's been pretty prolific as a 3-point shooter, and then is able to create his own shot off the dribble, especially when it comes to mismatches against big men on the 4 and 5 once they have to step up and you make a switch. And it worked really well against a Celtics team that likes to play a lot of man and then does a lot of switches. And it worked because a lot of the times, in quite a few opportunities, he had opportunities against guys like Al Horford, who, even at 37 years old, you'd still say he's a pretty good defender. But you look at him compared to a Darius Garland, who is in his early to mid-20s, you're going to take Garland in that matchup every single time. To me, it was a little disappointing for the Boston Celtics side of things, because with those opportunities, even though you kind of expect a Darius Garland to step up and an Evan Mobley to step up. You feel like even though you didn't have Kristaps Porzingis at all in this series, it feels like you probably should have won by at least a little bit more, and not necessarily a put up 7-8 points late in the ball game to increase the lead to 18-19 after you were teetering on a 7-8-9 point lead, but being able to have a sizable distance against a Cavs team that you could tell wasn't on your level. The fact that you lost the game on your home floor once again, and then in games 4, 5, and even in game 3, those were all somewhat close, and it felt like they should have been in a farther distance. Now, you look at it, and the other Eastern Conference series that may or may not be wrapping up in tomorrow night's matchup comes the Indiana Pacers and the New York Knicks. And even though Jalen Brunson, he was injured, and you could tell he wasn't 100%, and then you look at Josh Hart and the fact that they had lost 2 games on the road to Indiana, we thought the pace had completely switched and all the momentum went towards Indiana's side. But you could tell there's a big difference between the Pacers at home and on the road. There's basically a 10-point difference in how much they score, and then the point differential between what they give up and how much they score in wins and losses, that is basically night and day. And you could tell by it even in game 5, as the Pacers lost by 30 to the New York Knicks after what we thought this was a prime opportunity. If Jalen Brunson isn't 100%, you still don't have Julius Randle, you still don't have Mitchell Robinson, and the starting lineup was 4 guys that were under the height of 6'5", and then 1 7-footer in Isaiah Hartenstein. You felt like, okay, the fact that guys aren't 100%, you look at the fact that they probably won't be able to rebound the ball too well, and you're going against a fast-paced offense in Indiana. I know that it's not a good road team, Tyrese Halliburton and company is, but this is the perfect opportunity to steal a road game, get the win, take the series lead 3-2, head it back to your place, and close it out there. Well, that completely didn't happen, and utterly shocking to me, Game 5, the fact that New York was able to get as many offensive rebounds as they did in that game with the height deficiency, I guess you could say, that they had, because Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo both are 6'4", but Jalen Brunson is listed at 6'2", and then even Miles McBride is 6'1". So you look at other guys on the Pacers team like Pascal Siakam, Miles Turner, Tyrese Halliburton. Those guys, you felt like, because they are so much taller than a majority of the Knicks lineup at this point, they should have easily been able to out-rebound to keep themselves in the game. But they got dominated on the board. Second chance points was the big difference maker in this game. And you could even look at some of the guys on the Pacers team. They just didn't bring it that night. And now you go back to Indiana. This feels like this is an opportunity to take it to a Game 7. But even if Indiana is able to win on their home floor and extend it to a Game 7 where anything could happen, the fact that it's still going to be back at the Garden leads me to believe, whether it happens tomorrow night or in Game 7 in a couple nights from now, I have to take the Knicks in this one, whether it's in Game 6 or in Game 7, and that's going to be your Eastern Conference Finals matchup. It's going to be the Celtics, the 1 seed, versus the New York Knicks, the 2 seed. Then you look towards the Western Conference, and the Timberwolves, utterly shocked the Nuggets on their home floor, taking games 1 and 2. We were talking about maybe there's a potential sweep. That was a lot of conversation from the national media. But the Nuggets were actually able to do the exact same thing on the Timberwolves' home floor, and all of a sudden, we're talking about this is a whole new series. It's tied 2-2. But who's actually going to be able to get a win on their home floor? Well, the defending champs Denver Nuggets took it right to Rudy Gobert and the Timberwolves in their last game just the other night, as they were able to get a pretty solid win by 15 over a Timberwolves team. At this point, the fact that the Nuggets have won 3 games in a row, Jokic seems to be back in his groove. He seems to have everything clicking on all cylinders. Jamal Murray, who seemed like he was getting clamped up in Game 2, and that was completely understandable if you ever had seen anything from that game. But since then, they've been able to step up. Aaron Gordon has been super efficient. Like, he might have to get drug tested. The fact that he is not missing any shots. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a random drug test going towards Aaron Gordon sometime soon because of how good he's been able to play and how efficiently he's been able to score. It hasn't been like a 23 of 24 type of night where you're like, how is he able to do this? But he was going 11 of 12, 11 of 14. Like, he is shooting a super high percentage. And the fact that you still have Michael Porter Jr., you still have other guys coming off the bench at this point, even though it's on the Timberwolves' home floor and you feel like they have a good chance to at least take it to a Game 7, I still have to take the Nuggets at this point. And then looking towards the Dallas Mavericks and Oklahoma City Thunder, this one's had quite a few twists and turns as Oklahoma City was able to take Game 1, but then the Mavericks were able to take one on their home floor and then get Game 3 on their home court in Dallas. And at that point, you're thinking, okay, Game 4, if you win one more on your home floor, it doesn't matter if you lose Game 5 in OKC. You just come back in Game 6 and win it. But because Luka was getting a little upset with the refs and he was jawing at them the whole time, basically, and he was looking for calls, you could just tell that he wasn't totally focused on just trying to win the ball game. He was looking for calls, and that kind of gave Oklahoma City an opportunity, and they were able to make the comeback, especially when it came to Luka not shooting proficiently at all, had quite a few turnovers, and then Kyrie was basically a non-factor when it came to shooting the ball as well. He had only taken 11 shots and finished with 9 points as Oklahoma City was able to make the comeback and tie the series at 2 apiece. However, when you look at Game 5, that one, Luka seemed to be all focused on just trying to win the ball game. I don't even think he really talked to the ref at all in last night's matchup, as the Mavericks were able to get the 104-92 win to take the 3-2 series lead. Not only was Luka proficient, having a 30-point triple-double with 10 rebounds and 11 assists on 12 of 22 shooting, looked really good. Kyrie Irving, it was a less than stellar, had a pedestrian 12 points, but it was the fact that Derrick Jones really stepped up for them when he really needed to. And then you got solid contributions off the bench by Derek Lively as the 5. They're still able to block a ton of shots. And I've been absolutely shocked at how many block shots that we've seen in this series, especially what we had seen in Games 3 and 4. And then you saw another solid amount in last night's matchup. But at this point, now you head back to your home floor if you're Dallas. Even though Luka isn't 100%, I got to believe that even though this is a young and talented Oklahoma City squad, I don't think that they're going to be able to make the comeback. Win one on the road and then get back one on your home floor. I think that's going to be really tough. And I think that you're going to put all your effort, if you're the Mavericks, into getting this Game 6 win to not have to worry about a Game 7. You hopefully get some extra rest, and maybe the Timberwolves are able to take it to a Game 7 so you get an extra couple of days before you have to play your conference finals. And that would be perfect for Luka because he's got a knee sprain, knee soreness in the other one. He's got an ankle sprain, and then he's got back soreness. So he's got plenty of injuries that he's dealing with, and yet he's still able to have that type of impact on the floor. I just got to believe at this point, even though the Mavericks haven't made crazy advances into the playoffs and made deep runs, because Luka and Kyrie have so much more experience than this young Thunder squad, I think they're just able to take it in 6. And now they actually have a couple of days of rest because they don't play until Saturday night when they play at 7 o'clock. So a little bit of extra rest, back on your home floor, to me seems like a closing game for the Mavericks. And it probably should happen. Now, of course, before we sign off, hope you're enjoying this edition of Cleats and Sneaks. Don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell. That way you get notified anytime we upload any one of our podcasts, not just this one, but of course also For Tire Change with Dawson Iserlo, and then the Miguez Mindset and Over Par with Matt Miguez. Of course, we'll also have local coverage of our teams, the LSU Tigers, the Louisiana Raging Cajuns, the New Orleans Saints, who, by the way, they also just had their schedule for 2024 unveiled. And that one's a pretty interesting one. And I'm going to get more into that with the NFL and the schedules in a later episode, but a little bit of a tease. I did find that this one was a little bit interesting. There's some good points and there's some bad points. So I can't say it's a terrible schedule, but I also can't say that it was a great schedule by the NFL because it's not the best start to the season because you have to face the Dallas Cowboys in week 2. You're at home against Philadelphia, but that's in week 3. And then in week 5, you're going to have to go on the road on Monday Night Football to play the 2-time defending champs, Kansas City Chiefs. And then not only with that Chiefs game on Monday night, you're also going to have a 3-game stretch over 10 days. 2 of them are at home, but the fact that you go Monday night at Kansas City, come back home the next Sunday and play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but then you stay at home. However, Sean Payton makes his return to New Orleans on that Thursday night. So we talk about player safety from Roger Goodell in the NFL. If that's the case, why is a team playing 3 games in 10 days? 2 of their 3 primetime games are going to be within 10 days of each other, and there's going to be another game sandwiched in between it? That's ridiculous to me. But there was a couple of bright spots. I thought that the fact that you're going to have a nice start to the season, I don't want to say it's a cupcake because it feels like every team has gotten better over the offseason, but you start week 1 against the Panthers. You got a couple of games throughout the season where it feels like this is pretty winnable. The fact that you also have a home stretch of basically a month staying in the Superdome. You're going to play Atlanta November 10th. November 17th, you're going to host the Cleveland Browns. Week 12, that following week, Thanksgiving week, you're going to be off for your bye week, and then you're going to host the Los Angeles Rams. So from basically early to mid-November up until early December, you're going to have the whole month of staying at home, and you're not going to have to travel. And then there's also not huge road trips. I mean, you're going to have to go to Los Angeles at the end of October and then head to the opposite side of the country to go to Charlotte in early November. But outside of that, it's not too bad when it comes to long road stretches. The only thing that I do worry about is once you get into December, you're going to have to play at New York in December 8th. I say at New York, but it's East Rutherford, New Jersey, as you take on the New York Giants. You sandwich that in with a game against the Washington Commanders in Jaden Daniels, which worries me because the majority of this schedule, you look at it and it's a lot of athletic quarterbacks. But then you go 2 days before Christmas. So Christmas Eve, you're going to be at Green Bay to take on Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers, which 2 road games where it's an open stadium and it's going to get very cold and very windy. Even though we saw them play relatively well against the Cleveland Browns in that snow game not too long ago, I don't know how I feel about this team because how much have they actually taken a step forward? We're just going to have to see, and there's going to be plenty of conversation of what's going to happen with this team and the rest of the NFL over the offseason. But I appreciate you tuning in to another edition of Cleats and Sneaks. Next week, we'll probably be able to tell who's actually going to be in the conference finals, and we'll be able to preview that and maybe get someone to talk about that. Appreciate you tuning in. I am James Mesh. Talk to you next week.